Hey, hello again. So this is much bigger than I thought, which maybe usually is the case when you do something new. You say, oh, there's no problem. I just tell the story and I have the pictures to go with and stuff. And then this morning, now I'm at it for 4 hours already, trying to structure it, to try to think, where do I start, because this is big. I mean, this is much bigger than I thought. I give it a shot. I try. I'll do my best. So I was going to talk about burnout, and I had a burnout when I was 25. And so when I think about how did it get there, and how does this go together with trauma and war, and so I think the central, I think, well, according to my analysis now, it was when the myth of myself totally crashed into reality. So I think we all grow up with myths, right? I mean, there's, you know, and there's nothing wrong with it, I think. I think it's quite natural. You grow up in your field, in your environment, in your language, in your structure, and this is how we do it. This is your normal, where you grow up. But when you're healthy, then you have a check on reality. So if reality changes, you adapt. You don't go with the myth. But now it's like this. Okay, then I have to change things. Oh, this is really abstract, right? I'm going to try to take it down. I take it down to. So, to explain my myth, I have to explain my mom's story. And now this, I don't want to bitch about my mom. She did her very best, really, really tried. But she was, as I understand it now, a highly traumatized child. So her best, just in critical situations, for me as a child, in drama situations, was not enough. Okay, so my mom, she comes from a family that before the First World War was exceedingly rich. So this is her mother and her father. They grew up in this kind of industry nobility kind of thing, with lots of servants and big dinners and you know, carriages and kind of this. So that was their normal, right? That's how we do it. We have lots of servants. We have you know, maids for washing and maids for children, and you know, governance and this kind of thing. There's this story in my family that my grandfather, who I actually never met, he died before I was born, so my mother's father, that he got sent to bed by his mother with a kiss on the hand. Good night, Mama. Kiss on the hand, because his mother, by that time, when they were brought to bed by the governant or whatever you want to call her, she was already made up, and diamonds, and there was dinner parties and stuff, you know. So you couldn't kiss her because there was, you know, powder and stuff. So that was their normal. That was the culture. So then, for my mother's mother, as far as I know, the greater part of the wealth was lost in the First World War. So they had already been fleeing one time from the east, moving west, when those parts of what until then had been Germany were lost, and they moved. But there was still, I mean, they still had some stuff, like jewelry and stuff. So but what I've heard is that my mother's father, he couldn't deal with it, to not be the rich guy, to have all this stuff. So he started drinking. So there's already trauma there on that side. But the myth doesn't die so fast, I guess. So my mother's mother still grew up in this French and piano kind of, that is what the girl of this kind of family. And there's, if I remember right, she wanted to be a secretary, so she wanted to learn how to type, and she wasn't allowed to, because you don't do that, right? That's not that's for other people. That's not us. So myth, reality, conflict. Then comes World War II, and my grandmother was again in what now is Poland, so again too far east to be Germany after that, but that of course they didn't know, but that's how it turns out. And she had married this guy from this really rich family who still was, they, as far as I know, they still were fairly rich by that point. And they had 4 children. My mother is the second, so the first is a daughter, then comes another daughter, then comes a son, and then comes a handicapped child. So my aunt is born spastic, and then she gets to be deaf as a baby. So by the time that my grandmother has to flee, because everybody was running from the Russians, right? So that's I read in this book, I read that that 12 million people were on the move. 12 million people at that time. And on the move means you lose everything. You lose everything. I mean, there were no cars, there were no, there were trains. Many people were walking for weeks. I mean, my grandmother, as I heard, got the last train. She actually made it on the last train west, not knowing where she was going. They had no place to go. I mean, it was not like we're going to visit Aunt Martha. No, no, no. And of course, her husband was in the war. So, as all the husbands. So she's on the move. They leave. And my mother was 12, I think, when it actually gets that far. The thing is, why I'm, I don't know so much about all this. My mother doesn't want to talk about it. So what I know is very, very few stories. So I'm kind of trying to build a picture from these few insights that I have. What I know is so my grandmother with 4 kids, the youngest handicapped and cannot walk until she's 8. So she cannot walk at this point. They are fleeing for 2 years, summer and winter. For 2 years, they don't have a home, so they lose everything. And my mother talks about the Steinway. They had to leave the piano. They had to leave the piano. I don't think that was the major problem, but that is what she says. I don't think my grandmother ever played again. Sorry. I don't know. They say that she was really good playing the piano. I never heard her play a piano. So, I mean, for my mother, oh, here's one point I don't want to forget. These girls, my mother and my aunt, 1 year older, they, as many others, they missed their puberty. This is exactly when they're in puberty. All this happens. And there's no chance to have a puberty, to put on makeup and, start dancing and all this thing. All this thing doesn't happen. Romance doesn't happen. So, for 2 years, they don't have a home. They lose everything. Everything. Their security. My mother keeps saying she's pretty overweight and she always buys too much food, which has to be thrown out sometimes, which she hates. And she keeps saying, I hate to be hungry. I've been hungry so much. And I hate to freeze. I've been freezing so much. So, it must have been devastating. I mean, I can only, as I said, I have very few stories, true stories, real stories, down to earth. It was terrible, it was disgusting, it was frightening stories to go on here. But I mean, I can, if I put myself into that situation, my grandmother, it was, I mean, she made it with 4 kids, 1 severely handicapped, which she also managed to get away from the Nazis. They, that's another story. That was already, they tried to kind of collect, and then, they had kind of special camps for handicapped children where, yeah, they didn't come back from, kind of, oh, I'm sorry, an accident happened, kind of. My grandmother never left my aunt out of her sight. So Marga, my grandmother, she was called Tough Marga by her son, by my uncle, and he meant it in a bad way, I think. I don't think he meant it nicely. I don't remember that. But I think she must have been extraordinary. I mean, to make that 2 years of living in old factories, of protecting her daughters from rape. I don't know if she managed. My mother insists that she did. Her sister, anyway, got raped. My grandmother's sister. That is one part of the story which I hush learned at some point. Not in detail, but that she got raped 4 times by bands of Russian soldiers. So gang rape 4 times. So it was very real. The danger was exceedingly real. And it must have been incredibly traumatizing. So one more story that I know of is they were living at one point in a porcelain factory that of course was not working. There's no production of porcelain. Everything was breaking down, right? So there was thousands, I don't know how many, thousands of refugees, mothers and kids and old people, living in this porcelain factory, but there was no food. And my grandmother couldn't leave my aunt and the small boy, so she sent out my mother and her sister to beg. Go to the farms and beg. Beg for potatoes, something to eat. So they had a little backpack. And they were sent out to beg. Remember the myth. Remember where they come from. What the myth was about how we do it in this family. So they're walking in the countryside, and suddenly they see a little goose that got away from her flock, and she was all alone on the road. So they took it. And now here's my grandmother, Tough Marga. She had said, we never steal. We don't do that. We ask. Okay, so they knew they weren't supposed to take that goose. But they did, because they were so hungry. And they were thinking, oh, meat, oh, goose, oh my God. So they took it into the backpack. And it was alive, they didn't kill it. So they couldn't kill it. I mean, they were no country girls, right? So and then my mother tells how they had to go through, pass through some checkpoints of American soldiers that were there. And the goose was kind of making sounds. So they started to sing really loud, these girls. So the goose wouldn't be found. And they made it through. And they came to my grandmother and they said, look, we have a goose. And my grandmother said, where did you get this from? And then they told her, we found it, it was all by itself. Did you ask to have it? No, you bring it back. Myth alive, right? We don't steal. This is not us. So she sends them back. And they go back with the goose. And they go to the farm that was there. And they tell this farmer's lady. And in that area, this was a rich farm. There had been no bombs. So they bring this little goose to the farmer's lady, and she had a lot of geese. There was a big flock. And they tell her, we're sorry. we took this, but we want to bring it back. Here's your little goose. Could we have some potatoes, please? And the farmer's lady says, why didn't the Russians kill you, scum? Why didn't the Russians shoot you? Well, I don't know why. But they didn't. Yeah. It's the story of the goose. It's one of the very, very few stories that I got told from that time. So, the way my mom deals with this horror, which I think was just too much for her, is that she usually tells a story about the war like this. You know, we were so lucky. We were so lucky because we had this strong mother. So I was never scared. Through all this, I was never ever scared. Never. And that cannot be true. And also I know that my aunt got into a big fight with her one time because she told this, oh, weren't we lucky? Because we had this strong mother, so we never had to be scared. And my aunt got really upset and said, what are you talking about? We were scared all the time. So they got in a big fight, but they didn't have a great relationship ever. So fight was not, yeah, anyway. They kind of tried to avoid each other all through my childhood, these sisters. So no, of course that cannot be true. I'm sorry, Mom, I cannot continue to tell your beautiful story of that you had this strong mother. Of course you had this strong mother. I mean, it was amazing what my grandmother did. I can't even imagine. I'm sorry she's dead now. Now I would like to talk to her. I would like to ask her. But I can't anymore. That's really too bad. But so my mother created a myth, the strong mother myth. And that is the myth that she lived when I was a child. And she was amazing. I mean, I remember when I was a kid that a lot of my friends said, oh, I wish I had a mother like yours. and it kind of blew my mind. Why would, but I couldn't express it. It was just not, yes, my mother really took care of us. She made the greatest birthday parties. She was really funny. She still is. Telling stories but the thing is that when something crashed with the myth, for example, like the myth is we are one happy, beautiful family and everything is going great. And we have a strong mother and there's security. There's always security. We never have to be afraid. Well, unfortunately, a myth is a myth. And reality is reality. So, in my childhood, I got hurt a lot. I don't know why, really. I haven't but it has something to do with this. So I had, like, really many accidents. So did my brothers, actually. There was a joke going around town where we grew up, like one of them has always a cast. So, and then unfortunately, and I will tell more about this later when I get into the other stories, but my mom couldn't cope with it. I guess the fancy word is she disassociated. So she, like, when there's drama, when there's blood, and then she was going, oh, she didn't see me. She didn't hear me. So and another fancy word that I learned from listening to the internet, trying to make sense of all this, is what is trauma? I think that is Levine also who said that. A disturbance of the self-regulating process. So it seems that biology basically has a self-regulating process, which in this part of the story is, I would argue, being able to adapt to reality, to life as it happens. So you're regulating. You kind of have a map, an inner map where you find yourself. But if you live a myth, like the myth is here, I'm like, wow, I'm like this super fancy person. And reality tells you you got lots of bills to pay here. And you can't pay them. Well, maybe you shouldn't buy the makeup, right, for the fancy person. Maybe you should pay the electricity bill. But maybe you don't do that. Because, it's like this. So that when it goes too far apart, that is what I would argue. And you can't keep up the myth. But you can't face it that it is a myth. Because that's how you deal with life. You think that's real, but it's a myth. That's when so-called burnout happens. And I actually think that the word burnout is wrong. When I shut down, I called it, I blew my fuse. Because the word burnout wasn't around. I'd never heard about it. Maybe it was, but not in my world. And I find that better, blow a fuse. Because burn out, that sounds like it's all dead. And it actually turns out that this was a healing process for me. I can see that now. But I couldn't see it then. It felt like a total catastrophe. So, okay, map. Right. So this is my first picture of burnout. So here's me, right? Running, trying to make sense. And this is how the world looks. It's like, you see all these exclamation marks, so that's warning. And all these question marks, that's like, I don't get it. And it's like all these places, but they all seem dark. They you don't get it. Everything is too much. I made some kind of thing here. Everything's too much. I don't have the tools to deal with this. I don't have the tools, and why don't I have the tools? Why don't I have the tools? Well, it seems to me I don't have the tools because until this point, until I was 25, and I guess I'm lucky that it happened when I was so young, basically. I grew up in a myth, and I was still living the myth, not being aware of it at all, obviously. So I've been going for career, because that's what we do, don't we? So, and I've been making tons of money, and I've been working without any stop. I mean, 16-hour days. I got a key from my boss, so I could go in and work weekends. Obviously no overtime pay or something. Never entered my mind to ask for it. And I had, you know, I also had great fun. It was great. I was making tourism films, and it was very creative. And the creative part, that's really me. I mean, that is, I had so much fun also, and I learned so much, and so I had a great time, but I didn't have a stop. I was not in touch with myself, and that, I would argue, I find it so amazing how we humans, you know, now we want to go into space and kind of, you know, and and we know so little about what it is to be human. Who am I? How do we function? How do humans work? I would argue there's lots to answer there. There's lots of science that is missing. So at that point, when I'm 25 or 26 maybe, I was in Munich. I had been very successful working, but I was going without a break. And how they define burnout is like you work too much. And I always thought that, but I actually think that's not really the case. Working too much kind of made me weak, made my system weak over the years. But what really did it then was that I had the picture of life that I had, the myth, and life had just gone much too far apart. So I wasn't, now when I look back, I see I made so many mistakes, and life was warning me. I could have known this would go wrong. So in the end, I started my own company with friends. And I actually knew this wouldn't work. I could have known, and I got warned. But I didn't listen, because I was living in a myth of success and so, and it didn't work. So this is phase one. Phase one is, and this of course is a long time. I mean, this is, I'm pretty strong, I think, so I lived in this for months. I don't remember, because actually this kind of takes, this is a pretty wild time, so memories, but I think this is enough. I mean, it's just, I was working and not getting anywhere. And then the other people in the company, we were a group, they got it long time before me, and they just pulled out, and I felt betrayed. So I kept working more, instead of saying, okay, no go, which I actually could have known before we started. Because the salesperson that we had, and you know, you can be as creative as you want. If you want to make film, and at that time it was expensive, that time it was big cameras, you know. If you want to make film, you gotta sell them. You need sales. But money, and I will get to that later, that part was a complete mystery to me. And the salesperson we took into the company was absolutely not capable of filling that position. And somebody that he'd worked for before, who knew that, told me and said, you know, with that salesperson you can just forget it. Never, ever. That guy can just not. It's not that he was a bad guy, he just couldn't do it. Well, I guess he lived his myth. But truth is, he couldn't. So we went bankrupt. Which, all in all, I mean, bankruptcy, it's not a big deal. The big deal was that I felt, yeah, then blame was thrown. The sales guy takes off with the rest of the money of the company. So there was betrayal, there was theft, there was lies, there was blame. And that by people that I thought I knew, I thought I trusted. And they all, you know, I don't want to, you know, it's not like their fault and not mine. I could have known all this. This is the point. The point is I could have known. But I was hanging on to the myth of myself. And that's how I got here. Because reality and myth were, so it's like all mushy. And there was some weird stuff happening to me at that time. One night I was, that was pretty much toward the end, before I actually shut down. I was sitting on my sofa, cross-legged, and suddenly I see, and I'm already out of it, you know, so I see black, kind of smoke-like stuff coming from, like, between where the wall hits the ceiling, coming out of that. And I'm like, and I get paralyzed. I actually got paralyzed. The only thing I could move was my eyes. So my eyes are kind of... And then I get this thought that is, when they get to you, you die. What a weird thing. But I can't move. And then my little brother actually saved my life. I told him this. He doesn't even want to know this story because he thinks it's too weird. Because suddenly the phone rings. And the phone was standing right in front of me, and that shocked me so much that I actually cross-legged, jumped out of the sofa this high. So I kind of wake up by crashing back down into the sofa. And later I've seen some guys jumping cross-legged. I don't know how you do that. I only did that once, in that point. And I kind of grabbed the phone like a lifeline. And it's my little brother, who never calls me, who just got the idea to call me just at that second. And does it. Great. Fantastic. So I kind of start crying. And he says, what? You know, he just wanted to ask me how I am. So I'm kind of crying and freaking and saying, you just saved my life. And he's like, what? Oh my God, they must think I'm so weird, my brothers. And they probably do. Well, whatever. yeah, so that was toward the end, and there was like a ghost story, and suddenly I have this ghost in this apartment, and I still don't know, you know, I really don't know how all that goes together. Somebody else knows about stuff like that, like Simon Parks or somebody who, I don't know, I don't think I have to know. Anyway, what happens is I go more and more down, but I never call for help. So I get panic attacks, more and more panic attacks, and in the end I'm incapable basically of leaving the apartment. So I get panic attacks just going to a supermarket to buy food. So I go in the night. I kind of creep through the darkness. I kind of walk near the houses. So I'm always in the dark. And trying to in and out, you know, grab something and out. And then I come home and it's only like cigarettes and wine and chips that I have. So I live on that for 2 days, and then I have to go out again. Oh no. So I go out again. And I mean, panic attacks going to your local store. That's what happened. And I don't know so much else. I just know that I did not ask for help. And then one night, so here comes my parents, and here this war thing, this actually worked. So this kind of, if there's emergency, we go and we do it, doof, right? This kind of thing. So I don't know, I did this for weeks. You know, the money was running out, and I couldn't deal with anything. Yeah, I was, I remember one more thing, and that is actually I caught myself standing in the bathroom looking into the mirror with a fork in my hand, trying to hurt me, trying to put, and this thought of, you will feel better if you ram, you know, if you put this fork into your arm. And I'm standing there, and the fork's shaking, and I'm looking into the mirror, seeing myself. Suddenly I see myself. I don't even know how I got there. And I didn't. I didn't. I woke up, so I didn't do that. I hurt myself in other ways, but I didn't actually hurt my body. Wow. Yeah, that was a... wow. And here I am, right? I'm here. So this is 30 years ago. About. Okay, so then next phase, next step is, one day my parents called, and they'd been getting really worried because they don't hear from me, and they were far away, right? I'm in Munich, so I'm like 600 kilometers away, so it was not just to pop around. And so they were getting really worried, and they called me, and I basically told them to go to hell, leave me alone. Which I didn't do normally, so they knew something were really wrong. So later my mother told me that she just spontaneously started to cry, being completely lost, and then a friend came by who's a pretty cool Finnish lady living in Germany, and just, well, by accident, synchronicity, saw my mother and my father sitting there not knowing what to do. They're out of it, they don't know what to do. They're really worried about me, but they don't know what to do. So this friend comes by and catches them at that, right into that situation, And then she says, I'm going to call her. So she calls me. And she's usually a very soft-spoken woman. So the phone rings again from my side of the story. Phone rings again, what now? You know, like I pick up the phone, I say, I told you to leave me alone. And then there's Helena on the phone. And I'm like, whoa. You know, I wasn't at all counting on that, of course. And then this soft-spoken, sweet woman is really tough on me and says, what are you doing there? What are you doing? And then I start to cry and say, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know, you know, I was here. I didn't know what I was doing. But nobody had asked me what I was doing. So she asked me, what are you doing? And then the next question she asked me is, do you have somebody there who loves you? Is there anybody who loves you? And I said, no. Oh. I had told everybody to go to hell. And nobody loved me enough to say, fuck no. I will not leave you. Everybody said, okay, goodbye. Which I don't blame them for, because I was pretty rude, I think. I don't know. Anyway, she said, is there somebody who loves you? And I said, no. And she says, come home. We love you. And then it dawned on me. And I said, I can't. I was here. I said, I can't. I couldn't buy a train ticket. No way. It wasn't possible. It wasn't possible. I can't. And then she said, I will call you back. Stay there. So then next thing, my father calls. And then he had gotten out of his, oh my God. And he says, okay, Anya, now we do it like this. And then bam, 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 bam. So he asked me if I was capable. That was so great. I mean, he didn't tell me I'm an asshole. He didn't tell me I'm a loser. He didn't tell me he doesn't know what the fuck I'm doing, which of course he didn't. No. He just said, okay, are you capable of buying boxes and pack your stuff? We will come next weekend. I will hire a truck. We will come and we will get you. So I said, I don't know if I'm capable of buying boxes. And he said, okay, don't worry, if you're not capable. So they actually did. My mom, my dad, and my little brother, they hired a truck. And they drove down 8 hours. And they packed me up. Packed up the apartment, cleaned it, and then I was in such a bad shape, I think, that they got a real shock. So they decided that, they came with a car too, so a truck and a car. So they decided that my father would pack me into the car and fast drive back from Munich as fast as possible, and the truck couldn't go so fast, so that my mother and my little brother Alex, they would take the truck and go slower So then I remember that the moment I sat, I kind of functioned somehow. Until the moment that I sat in the car. And my father said, now we go home. And then my whole body freaked. And it was so amazing, so amazing. I started to shiver that my teeth were clattering. So I told my father, I'm so cold. I was so freezing. So he puts on the heating full. I remember he took off like everything but his shirt, and still the sweat was dropping, and I was still freezing, and he gave me all kinds of clothes and blankets and stuff. So I'm lying under this heap of blankets in this sauna-like car, freezing for 8 hours. No, I fell asleep at one point. I think I fell asleep. But I was shaking so that I was almost shaking the whole car. So now comes phase 2. And this, I think, okay, this is me sleeping. Very thin. Then I actually slept for 3 months. I mean, well, of course I didn't. I mean, I didn't actually sleep, but I mostly slept for 3 months. And that, I also told my parents, I mean, that's the greatest present they ever gave me, is that they let me sleep. But I can only go home with you if you let me be, if you don't ask questions until I'm ready to answer. Because you cannot, like, push me. I just felt like that then I don't know, then maybe I would go mad or something, which probably after you heard this part of the story, people would argue I already had. But yeah. So I sleep for 3 months, and they let me be. They let me sleep. And then my mother, well, she tried some things like pushing food on me, like, don't you want to come eat? And I said, no. So then she put, I said, if you insist on food, put food on the stairs. And if I'm hungry, I eat. And if I'm not hungry, I will not eat. That's what I can do. And sometimes I eat something. I don't remember much of that time. But, I mean, I must have eaten. I didn't even smoke much. She actually, being a non-smoker and not fond of smoking and stuff, she actually bought cigarettes for me and put them on the stairs. And I smoked a little bit, but not much. I slept. It was my old room at the house, so I had some books, and sometimes I remember that sometimes I try to read something, some novel, some love story or something, and I would like read 3 pages and fall asleep. So for 3 months, around, that was it. I wasn't going anywhere, I wasn't seeing anybody. I was in my room, sleeping. And when I listen to these people who talk about healing trauma, Peter Levine and the German ladies there, that was probably the best thing I could do. So in that case, I actually completed the circle. I think. Well, I don't know, but that's how it feels. Because when I woke up, I was perfectly capable of doing things again. And as far as I remember, basically from one day to another, suddenly thinking, okay, this is my situation, here I am now. So I decided to get a job. And I got another job at the TV at my hometown where my parents live. And it turns out, I'm having no self-esteem, of course. I had no self-esteem. I felt like shit. Because I felt like a complete loser. But my system was working. So it turns out that they loved me because I'd learned so much in Munich. I worked with some really good cameramen and some really good cutters, and that was actually quite rare there. To have somebody who had so much experience in TV, is what I was told. So actually it was really easy to get a job, which I didn't think it would be, but since I felt like completely like a total failure, and it turns out it was super easy, and but what I can see now, what I didn't see then, I perceived it, but I didn't question it. When I awakened, I actually awakened into much more reality. The myth had died. I had gone out all the way, did everything, tried everything, and crashed. And when I awakened, ever since that time, career and being this fancy person of some kind was not an issue for me anymore. It was not a goal anymore. I never tried that again. I worked. But you know, it's not about not working. It's about not thinking that you have to get to this fancy point, whichever it may be. So it was a healing process. The whole thing was an incredible healing process. Healing of the myth. Because the question, isn't it, is really, who am I? Really? And not, you know, who am I pretending to be, or I don't know what car I drive, or I don't know if I can actually communicate this, what I mean. Yeah, right. So, in the end, before I got a job again, this Finnish lady, Helena, she asked me if she could take me to this healer, a Danish woman called Mao, and I heard she died now. And I said, you know what, Helena, forget it. I cannot make appointments, and this was driving 3 hours. I cannot drive. I mean, I couldn't drive. It was impossible at that point. And she says, I fix it all, but I do need you to consent. I do need you to consent. I cannot do it without your consent. So, oh, now I just realized that that was years later. Oh my God. Right. This was another breakdown. Well, I'll tell it anyway. Some years later I'm having a breakdown, but there's a different story. Then I killed the myth of, oh, relationship. It was about a love story. So I kind of broke down again, but not at all as dramatic as here. Just lots of crying and depression and stuff, but not like, you know, ghosts and seeing things and panic attacks to that degree. So much smaller. Anyway, I still want to tell this story about Mao, because this she was incredible. I had no idea who this woman was. Helena didn't tell me anything. And I met her for 20 minutes. One of the most incredible meetings that I've ever had in my life. Here comes this kind of, she comes in there, sits down, and bam, everything in me breaks. And I'm just starting to cry and cry and cry and cry. And later I heard she had that effect on many people. And she was such an amazing healer. And I know very little about her, but that was so great. So I'm kind of sitting there crying, saying, my life is at an end. My life is finished. And this woman is having a laugh attack. I mean, she freaked out. She was slapping her thighs, laughing. And first, I got really offended. So here I am crying, she's laughing at me. And then she said a sentence to me which has helped me many times after, and still does. She said, you know, Anja, somebody who has such a strong motor, such a big motor, she said, somebody who's got such a big motor as you should every now and then look where they're going. I mean, come on. I mean, you are so strong, you don't even fall down every time you hit the wall. But doesn't it hurt? And then I also had to laugh. Because yeah, it hurts. Yeah. She said this. That was the healing. And what she did, you know, energy-wise, I have no idea. But on the physical level, that was the healing sentence. And it has helped me a lot. Also to come up with this, what I talked about. So I would argue, in my case, anyway, I don't know how much this applies for others, but in my case, the burnout or blowing the fuse, because blowing the fuse I find much better, because that's too much energy in the system. So a security thing goes, right? That's a fuse to preserve the house from burning down, so you're not burning out. The fuse goes. Buff, shut down, fight, finished. Right? Everything off. That's better, at least from my story. That's... So the blowing the fuse happened because I lost the map. As she said it, with a big motor, much energy, keep crashing into walls, keep banging, keep insisting to bang into walls, instead of opening your eyes saying, Okay, I can't believe it. I talked for an hour because I'm recording this with my little old camera which has tapes. They go for an hour. So now I've actually got to wrap it up fast, because I got to get my daughter from the bus. But just this point. So if we call it blow a fuse and assume that it's a healthy system, right? The fuses are there to protect us. It's a healthy system. Oh my God, I have to call her back, my mother. It's a healthy system which has fuses that go so the house doesn't burn down. There is no burnout. There is a fuse that goes. So that makes me feel much more powerful with this. It's not like I'm a failure because, no, I have a healthy system which protects me so I don't burn out. Isn't that fantastic? So I'm going to wrap it up here with telling you the meaning that I used to wrap it up with the psyche, as I talked about before. And you do it whichever way. I'm sorry. I took a short break being outside and kind of trying to get this thing together here. And the meaning I used was, I rest eternally secure in the love of God. I rest eternally secure in the love of God. There is safety. There is security. Thank you for listening.